readers of AU Manufacturing News and members of the Australian Manufacturing Forum LinkedIn group. I'm Peter Roberts, and I'm your host today for our webinar, Secure Your Business Against Cyber Attack. We've heard a lot lately about the need for cybersecurity. We all know the time to take action was yesterday. But who of us is actually completely safe? Only last year, BlueScope steel operations were put out of action by a malicious cyber attack. At the other end, as individuals and SMEs, we know that we're vulnerable to simple but damaging loss of data and privacy concerns. This webinar begins from the premise that cyber threats are real. But there are things companies can do to understand the threats, to plan for and mitigate the effects of an attack, and of course, to recover from a cyber event. Today, we'll hear from 3 business leaders who understand the cyber threat and hear the steps they're taking to protect their businesses. Our latest webinar is brought to you with the support of Australian-owned ERP software provider, Softlabs. Softlabs creates custom solutions tailored for Australian manufacturing, backed by premier technologies from the like of Epicor, Fortinet, and Nozomi. Softlabs is a partner of choice for companies interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, data management, automation, and business optimization. Joining us today from Softlabs is Rade Bogdanovic, Director of Products. Rade, tell us a little bit about your company.
Thank you very much, Peter. And just to say, I'm very privileged to be on this panel with Julie, Grant, and Michael. And thank you very much for organizing this, Peter. Softlabs is an Australian company. We are actually spread around ANZ with offices in Sydney, Queensland, as well as Victoria, and we have presence in New Zealand since recently. We're focused heavily on manufacturing, SMB manufacturing space, and helping our customers to really achieve the best objectives, business objectives there are. So we not only provide our customers with, as you mentioned, some ERP solutions and concepts, but we also expanded our operations into cybersecurity. We are honored to be a partner of Fortinet for Australia and New Zealand, and we're looking to really help our customers with their prime technology to really achieve the enough of the strength of their systems. So what we're seeing with in the manufacturing space is definitely with convergence of OT and IT. Since recently, threat surface been expanded dramatically. So threat surface is now outside of IT. It's touching IoT, and I'm sure you will hear all about it during this this meeting and this seminar. However, the question is the readiness and where the customers are in that process. Threats are obvious. It's IP, it's financial, it's machinery, it's everything else. But I will leave it with that. I'm not going to spoil the further conversation. I'll leave it back to you, Peter, to announce the speakers.
Thank you, Rade, and thank you for Softlabs for making this possible. I'd like tonight to introduce our panelists. Julie Harrison, first of all, is CEO and Managing Director of Sydney-based Harrison Manufacturing and a director of a number of import and export companies in the Harrison Group. Harrison produces a wide range of lubricants, oils, and greases. Grant Tinney is founder and chairman of CTO at STÄRKE, Advanced Manufacturing Group, responsible for providing guidance to the management and shareholders of this diverse group. STÄRKE, and I hope I've got the name correctly pronounced, in companies in machining, fabrication, commercialization, and mold and die production in Australia and exports to the United States, automotive molds. Michael Murphy joining us from Fortinet, where he's Head of Operational Technology and Critical Infrastructure, Asia Pacific. Fortinet is a leading cybersecurity solutions provider and provides hardware and software services. Michael has more than a decade of real-world experience with background in critical incident response and digital forensics. I'd like to turn to Michael first of all. Michael, you've seen and investigated dozens of cyber incidents, perhaps hundreds. I said earlier the cyber threat was real. Is it?
Thanks, Peter. It's a loaded question to begin with. And I think to answer that, I'll be a bit self-indulgent. I'm a massive fan of Murphy's Law. So anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But I think that normally has very negative connotations. I actually prefer Matthew McConaughey's perspective from Christopher Nolan's Interstellar, which is anything that can happen will happen. And I think it's appropriate for us to appropriately plan for things that in a pragmatic way that could actually happen. The challenge now is that we actually are beginning to see more incidents take place that are targeting critical infrastructure. And I think there are three key things that I'm keen to kind of throw out to kind of the panel to kind of set the scene. I mean, one is qualifying the fact that this is happening. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre releases an annual report. Within that report, they have highlighted that there are more than 67,500 incidents reported annually. That's one every 8 minutes. And it's actually costing organizations more than $33 billion. That's self-reported losses. More importantly, the figure that's close to my heart that I think is often neglected is more than a quarter of those are associated with Australian critical infrastructure. And we think about Australian critical infrastructure, and then we think about the operational technology that underpins clean drinking water, the assumption that when we flick the light switch, energy is going to turn on, right? We have natural light. And I think what we're beginning to observe now is within the public domain, people are seeing that disruption leads to downtime, downtime leads to revenue loss, and revenue loss leads to irreversible brand damage in some cases, right? We can see within the OT landscape, if there is a major incident, a lot of the time you can't bring your organization back up online. And that's a luxury that many IT enterprise organizations have had, right? If they've had some form of compromise, there are other levers within the business that they can prop up revenue streams with. I think when we look at manufacturing, I think when we look at operational technology, there are three key verticals that are being focused on by threat actors that are highly motivated. One is exploitation of vulnerabilities that are known to gain access into OT environments. Two, we're seeing that OT assets are being directly compromised because they're now connected directly to the internet, when historically they were in what's referred to as an air-gap network that was not connected to the greater world. And then finally, we're also seeing IT assets that are being compromised where they're fundamentally managing OT networks or access into OT networks. And I'm sure we'll delve into some of those examples during this conversation. But ultimately, the misconception that I'm focused on highlighting to the industry and to people that are operating critical infrastructure is threat actors looking for the pathway of least resistance. And it's easy to gravitate to highly advanced, persistent threats, or even state-based attackers that are well-funded and well-motivated. We're seeing that you can compromise critical infrastructure, operational technology, and manufacturing services just by using the internet and freely available search engines to look for OT assets that are publicly connected to the internet. So that pathway of least resistance is certainly there. And I think finally, the point that I'll end on before we kind of, obviously open up the conversation is what we are seeing, what Fortinet is observing, is the application of cyber resilience within the manufacturing landscape and OT in general is now being deemed a matter of competitive advantage. So when organizations are looking to shift and pivot after COVID and brittle supply chains, they're now looking for partners or organizations that can support them that have some level of security and or security program in play. So maybe I'll leave it there before I sound too convoluted.
I would like to pick up one point, and that is the Australian companies we have today generally have a number of legacy systems. We have two companies here today which have a number of companies and perhaps going in different directions or taken over at different times. Is this the big task, how to tackle an organization with multiple legacy systems?
I think what we've observed, or at least the Fortinet strategy, has been to partner very closely with the technology providers. So we respect that organizations like Schneider, Honeywell, Yokogawa, ABB, they are underpinning kind of the critical services or the application of building or delivering capability. Ultimately, we've been working very closely with them to overcome a lot of those challenges. And yes, we are seeing that those assets are front of mind. We are seeing more vulnerabilities reported, but simply because they were never designed to be secure by design, right? They were deployed to be in an air-gapped network where the internet was not even necessarily on the radar. And it's only through this kind of convergence of IT/OT through Industry 4.0, connectivity. We all want real-world data and telemetry to make informed and strategic decisions that are accurate. That these assets have become front of mind, these brittle assets. And again, the hard part is not the application of technology. The technology is there to support and protect these legacy and brittle assets, to provide simplified viewpoints across different aspects of your business or multiple business units. It really comes down to the people and the process. The technology is a big part of it, but it's about awareness, education. It's about ensuring that you have people that feel enabled to respond. And I think one of the things that we're looking at now is, especially with government legislation coming in, like the Critical Infrastructure Act, for many organizations that operate OT networks, it's how do they determine whether something within their network that's causing disruption is actually a cybersecurity threat, or is it simply a product malfunction or something degraded that needs to be replaced? Again, I'm conscious that I'm probably going too broad now, but these are kind of the key fundamental concerns that organizations have. And again, the technology that you can deploy is there. It's about the people and the process that's applied to that.
We'll ask you one more question, Michael, because when we talked before, you talked about the issue of companies not actually knowing what is in their system. So could you talk about that and how you can actually get to know what's in your system?
So fundamentally, at the core of any industry recognized standard framework, such as NIST, IEC 62443, which is a logical segmentation model for understanding the network that you have that fundamentally supports the services or the manufacturing systems that you have. These are all things that are there to support. And I think when we look at visibility, it's impossible to protect something that you don't know you have, right? And probably the best example I can give of that is the Danish energy grid. So last year, the 22 sites for energy generation all went down simultaneously. And it was all caused by one vulnerability within these networks, where a third-party contractor had come in. They deployed ultimately a piece of networking equipment that the operator wasn't familiar with. Ultimately, because they didn't know that they had this asset within all of their networks, they didn't know that there was a critical vulnerability. They didn't know that they needed to patch it. Ultimately, that vulnerability was exploited, and all 22 sites were shut down. They went into island operation mode. And it's the perfect example of if you don't know that you have something within your environment, you can't necessarily protect it, and it could be the pathway of least resistance again into your network. So comprehensive visibility across not only the assets that you have, but also the protocols that they speak on is fundamental to any OT cybersecurity strategy.
Thank you, Michael. I'll turn now to Julie Harrison from Harrison Manufacturing. Julie, you've been preparing for a cyber intrusion for some time. What was your initial spark that caused you to take this seriously?
It was our insurance brokers, to be honest, Peter, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar. They were saying it was a matter of when and not if, and so we took it seriously, firstly with our systems, secondly with our education of our staff, because the experts, the insurance company that supports cyber insurance area, they came and visited us, and they said that the weakest link is always going to be people. So a little bit contrary to what Michael was saying in that obsolete, but it was people, and that's what happened with us in our incident, which happened in June last year.
Well, I understand you had a warning 10 years ago, Julie.
We did. And that was also via email. So both of our incidents were via email, and both of our incidents were a supplier's invoice being intercepted, edited, and then inserted into our payment system. And at that time, I contacted all of our Australian government, because at the time, the Australian government was promoting dealing with China. Ironically, it wasn't the Australian government that helped us. It was the Shanghai, I think it was, police precinct and it was from China at that point in time. But our most recent one was not China-based at all. It was Australian-based. And
Can you tell us what happened there and how you got out of the situation?
yeah, it was an event which continued to give us surprises, as Michael again mentioned. One of our suppliers' system was contaminated by a cyber event, and so when they were sending the invoice to us, it had a CC of a fraudulent email origin, which embedded a mail rule in our system in one particular employee's email box, which then proceeded to delete every legitimate email and embed every illegitimate email. From that, payment was made to what we thought was a legitimate supplier, change of account details, and quite a sizable amount of money left the company. But the story ends well. We got the money back thanks to good networks within our bank. But there was a lot of steps. As well as money, privacy was involved, and I'm happy to elaborate after that. Peter?
Very good. So you've said that you've been warned and that you think it's a when, not if. If so, are you planning now for a cyber attack? How are you planning to deal with the next cyber event?
Not with enthusiasm, but with pragmatism, we are planning. So firstly, our first line of defense, we are, like everyone else, up in the cloud. Our ERP is backed up to the cloud, but we take seriously all of our partners for our accounting systems and all our other systems. We choose them carefully and interrogate the steps that they've got in place. Secondly, as we are all educated to do, make sure our patches are installed regularly. We have multi-factor authentication. We've got latest versions of softwares on our ERP, and also our personal policies, internal operating policies, have got checks and balances in. And as we said, people are the weakest link in that they will click links and let the wolf in the door, so to speak. We make sure that our training is regular, it's varied. We have penetration testing, all of those sorts of processes. And we also have a checklist of what to do if it occurs again, how to close the potential loopholes, how to mitigate damages, all of those sorts of steps, which I hope Michael and Rade actually approve of, because you never know what you don't know. And Michael's exactly right. Is it some older piece of equipment program? Is that our backdoor, trapdoor, which will be our next downfall?
Thanks, Julian. I think when I talked to you before, you described this as a playbook that you have to respond to various incidents. Michael, Julian mentioned China and actually being an assistance there. Now, we normally perhaps think of China as a threat. Is that where the threats are coming from, or where are the sources of threat for a small business?
Yeah, look, I think there is a common perception to gravitate to different countries and different state-based sponsors. I think in the real world, what we're actually observing is it's anyone that feels the need to be opportunistic. What I've personally observed is it's the people that are just deeply intrigued to see how far they can go. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the pathway of least resistance right now simply requires the internet. And there's a free search engine that you can leverage known as Shodan. And hypothetically, if you disagreed with maybe the way in which an organization is generating energy, you could simply look up that organization through Shodan. You could look up what OT assets are potentially connected to the internet. and ultimately form some kind of method to bypass what security is in place, or alternatively directly connect because an asset's been misconfigured or deployed by a third party that doesn't think about security, right? So I think the other element is, and this is probably a more historical view, there are a lot of people that are going to university, right? And they're spending a lot of money on their courses, upwards of $20,000, $30,000 a year. Suddenly they learn a little bit about cyber and they discover, right, I can send one email, similar to Julie's point, or I can use Shodan and I can cause some form of disruption to an organization. We've seen one of our technology partners highlighted that the average cost of operational downtime within Asia Pacific is about $250,000 per hour. So pretty quickly, people are doing the math thinking, right, well, I can sit and do uni in cybersecurity and do my master's over 4 years, or alternatively, I can send a couple of emails or deploy a couple of notifications to some form of critical infrastructure or OT provider and earn 10, 20, 100, whatever it may be, a token amount in a relatively short period of time. And they can certainly hold that organization to ransom. And I think that's not necessarily just shutting everything down. It may indeed be to steal intellectual property, right, and resell it to the nearest provider. So I think within the IT landscape, there are perceptions over time where we've gravitated towards a certain origin of threat. I think within the OT realm, we need to think about it differently based on what we've observed and take into consideration that the motivation again, is a key driver, whether it's somebody simply disagrees with the way that somebody produces something. It might be socio or political initiatives. We saw recently the Utronics PLC HMI units that were directly connected to the internet. So these are assets that control critical functions of OT environments, including manufacturing. These were, I believe, Israeli made, but they were actually compromised via the internet and shown a splash screen that was against the conflict that's taking place in Gaza. So that was a geopolitical motivation, right? And again, I think it's dangerous to assume that it's going to be from countries, in short, before, again, I go off into a wild tangent. We need to think closer to home. We need to think about the motivators in place. And it's not difficult to compromise these systems. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Thanks. I guess this malicious actor can be inside your organization as well, a disgruntled employee. Grant, Tinney, I'd like to turn to you from STÄRKE. Grant, when did you really become activated on cybersecurity threats?
Well, first of all, Peter, thank you for inviting me to this panel, and great to meet all the fellow panelists. And it is STÄRKE, not the way that you pronounced it. So we'll get you there. So the question, when did we first get, I guess, involved? Really, my involvement really was heightened when we started bidding for key defence programs. And I can remember back when we were bidding for the Naval Group project for the Australian submarine, French design. We, in order to be able to quote some of their secure components, we had to go down a pathway that saw our company, our precision machine company, QPE, get DISP membership, as well as AS 9100D, which is the aerospace standard. And it was going through all that you suddenly, not suddenly, but we had a heightened sense of understanding of what was important. And why did Naval Group require this? Why couldn't they just send us data like they were always, like most of our clients were sending us data? And, we had our own IT guys work within the company, but I guess as chairman and managing the risk, we made the decision to outsource, I guess, first of all, the auditing function. And we used Saab cybersecurity here in Adelaide. Saab itself was a client as well as a provider to our organisation, and we got the guys in and they started the process of getting us up to a certain level in terms of DISP. First of all, it was entry level, then subsequent to that, level 1. And through that, they did an audit of our business, and then we had, from that initial audit, an action plan of where we need to be within 12 months. And so really that was the genesis of a heightened understanding of what our limitations at the time were. And so, within 12 months, they had gone through and done several audits, purposely tried to hack us at multiple points. We found out that something that I was really surprised about, that they could actually go on and control our machine tools on the shop floor from a different office in another, at Saab, right? And and they demonstrated that to me, and I thought, holy moly, that really heightened to me what sort of damage could be done from a very valuable piece that was sitting on a machine that we were machining for another client. And we're machining parts that, have values upwards of, let's say, a single piece, $250,000 that we've been working on for several months. And if all of a sudden somebody's steering a machine tool to damage that particular component so that it cannot be repaired, right, that's a very risky thing. So that was the original impetus for us. In order to bid for naval group secure work, we had to take control and up our security to achieve this entry level, and then subsequent to that, level 1.
So you described your company earlier. You described your company earlier as a rather complex structure of multiple companies, with you assuming different roles and a new CEO and so on. Who is responsible for cybersecurity in your company?
So we like I said before, we had an IT department. We outsourced, bringing us up to a certain level of cybersecurity to Saab. And then from that, we then assessed, we had to make the decision, can we internally manage our security and our network and our migration of our network, or do we need to outsource that? And we made the decision, ultimately it was my decision as chairman, to outsource to a company based here in Adelaide, Secure State, and currently, and for the last few years, they've managed all of our cyber and our security from that perspective. Even though we have internal people, we still outsource that function, And that takes many facets. That's from storing our data, redundancy of storage. It's auditing our systems on a periodic basis. They also do training for our staff on a regular basis. Yeah, so we made the decision early on to outsource that function.
When you're dealing with an advanced customer, such as the French naval group and the sort of secrets they have, do they test you? Do they personally put you through the hoops?
Yeah, they have their own people that come out and audit us, and as do all of our major defence in particular clients. They part of their auditing process is not just your manufacturing capability and your ability to work with them across many levels, such as your environmental policies and your quality standards. They also check your ability to resist or basically hold their data secure. So in the naval group, which is quite common, there's certain data that we have to keep very secure, and that can only be done via a encrypted USB, which is delivered in a secure fashion to our facility. We've only got 4 people within our organisation that can actually access that data in a hardened room with a hardened laptop that is not connected in any way, shape, or form. All of that's kept within a safe, and that is the only way we can look at certain data that comes in. And when we finish looking at the data, it's all wiped by a secure state, and that USB is returned to the client in a secure fashion. So that is quite common these days, Peter.
Across the half dozen or so companies, I believe, are in the group, do you have a common IT and OT systems, or is that multiple systems?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, fundamentally, we have common M1. So we run an ERP system across the group, and that is our management tool to not only from an accounting perspective, but also from a project management and managing the quality across all of our businesses. So there is 8 companies now in the group, and with one head company, and we use the common platform of M1 across the group. All of that is managed by a secure state. So that's another, I guess, a common platform. So they handle the data security across the group. We have two businesses that have DISP, or Defence Industry Security Protocol membership, which means that our fabrication site and our precision machining site are more secure than from a physical security as well as a data security standpoint. And it is those two businesses that do the majority of defence manufacturing for the group. So that's another level above and beyond what we would say have at our injection molding facility, say, for example.
Julie, you mentioned also that you had harmonized your systems. Is that an important part of knitting together the IT and OT systems of a group? And how have you done that? And where is your ERP hosted and so on?
We have harmonized it through having a group business technology center. And if I may just answer the question you asked Grant before, whose responsibility is it? It's each and every one of our responsibilities, but the conductor is our group business technology manager who hosts our harmonized systems. We've got an external provider which helps with a lot of the IT security firewalls, installing all of the normal cyber protections and the patches. How do we deal with the harmonization? We remember we have grown along the way, so we've had control. We haven't taken over or merged with another. So our path is more simple than if we're trying to mesh two different companies together. Ours is just growing another branch to the tree. And similarly to what Grant was saying, we have a controlling company, and all of the software is embedded at that level, and then just fed out services all of our other companies within the group.
So, Julie, what would happen to your company if you lost the access to the internet or you had a fire?
Good question. Those things are all possible, particularly the fire. What would happen? We've done in our resilience preparation, making sure that different sectors of the company can run the old-fashioned method, with printers, papers, writing down with a pen and a telephone. Our disaster recovery is off-site, and we partner with a provider that's got 3 different off-site positions. If we had a fire, we've got relationships with other grease manufacturers, both in Australia and internationally, so that our customers would not notice any break in their supply chain. And we also supply finished goods off-site. We store finished goods off-site. So from our IT perspective, we've got the data recovery. From our product perspective, and from our staff perspective, hasn't COVID taught all of us that we can work in any location, be it the corner coffee shop or the back of Burke, or even in the Cameron corner, thanks to the technology. So that doesn't help us if, as Michael says, infrastructure is taken down, but we've done a lot of preparation as much as we can foresee at the moment.
Michael, if I could turn back to you, we've got two companies here that have got very different approaches. One is outsourced its security, and one is handling it internally. Are there benefits to both models?
I think a big thing for us is ultimately listening to the way that OT organizations operate. It's not our role to come in and dictate kind of the strategy that should be adopted. We support customers that have obligations to maintain an air gap. We also support customers that want to go on that Industry 4.0 convergence of IT OT. More importantly, many customers are adopting the cloud, right? So I would say that fundamentally our role within the OT landscape is to listen, to understand the context of the customer environment, and actually work with them on a strategy that's going to meet their needs. Everyone has a different threshold of risk. Everyone's trying to meet a different security standard or framework. We've seen here, again, there's legislation that's in place through the Critical Infrastructure Act that's continuously expanding as well, which is influencing a lot of those kind of cybersecurity strategies. I think the key thing that I'd mention is independent of whether you insource or outsource, the activity that we see nets most benefit is getting the IT team out on the site floor, getting them to walk through a facility, get them to actually understand the ramifications of something failing to work or a bottleneck at a certain part of the manufacturing process, for instance. A lot of the time we see that you'll have a security team, an IT security team, where they see an alert and their first response is block something, but they don't understand the ramifications of that action. For many organizations that I've worked with that have had critical incidents, they didn't have that luxury, because if they shut down, say, generation or distribution, it would take them 3 months to bring everything back up online. So they had to feel comfortable operating in a compromised state. So I think that, I mean, there are two kind of activities. One, which is a little off topic, is whenever we come to talk to organizations and we bring the IT team and the OT team together, I always get them to watch Jurassic Park the night beforehand. It's now 30 years old, and the challenge that film highlights is the same challenge we're facing now, and comes back to your point, Peter, around insider threat. You might remember Dennis Nedry or Newman from Seinfeld, where he's highly disgruntled. He's bullied by his boss. He's got financial pressure. He accepts a bribe from the nearest competitor to steal intellectual property. He crafts simple malware that allows him to do that. He shuts down all the critical systems, leading to life and death scenarios, and ultimately doesn't understand the ramifications of what he puts into play. So that's kind of phase one. And then again, phase two is that cross-pollination. Get your OT teams and your IT teams to get together, get them to do site tours, get them to communicate. It sounds simple when I say it out loud, but it certainly nets strong benefits. And again, that's complementary to whether you insource or outsource capability, right? Work together, be a team, communicate.
Thank you, Michael. We've also been hearing a lot more from the government, and there's a cybersecurity centre and so on, which the government has been sending out lots of information to all of us all the time. Government regulation, is that intruding into this area, and what's the ramifications?
So if I look at the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, initially it was formed in 2018. It's since been revised. If you look at the core requirements for the obligations, one is comprehensive asset visibility, know what's within your network. The second is have the ability to identify an incident within a network within 12 hours, which is quite aggressive, and report on that incident to the ACSC. That's where my prior comment came into play around how quickly can you identify if something is a cybersecurity incident where you need an incident response analyst versus sending out a technician for a product fault. There's what's known as systems of national significance that must adhere to enhanced cybersecurity obligations. Now, those obligations around end user awareness, training, really proactive activities to kind of build resilience within your network. There's also vulnerability scanning that's beneficial to know where those pathways of least resistance are. And then finally, there's the critical incident response management program, which is a way of measuring the increased maturity year on year that you're applying to your network. And that's where it is recommended that you conform to, say, NIST, IEC 62443, or a common standard, right? Demonstrate that you're actually paying attention. I think when I look at the Critical Infrastructure Act, it highlights the core areas that should be focus points for any organization, whether it's IT enterprise or OT or a combination of both. More importantly, we're seeing countries like New Zealand that have voluntary requirements are proactively conforming to the Critical Infrastructure Act in Australia. We've seen the same in Singapore. And now recently in India, we've seen that they are now mandated, if they have critical infrastructure, they have to have an OT SOC. So we are seeing that government legislation and new obligations coming into play are complementary to organizations building budget to invest. And I think it is something that will continue to expand over time. I think it's something that that is in its early elementary phases. I think the key thing, again, is when we talk to customers, we like to observe and communicate so we can identify, well, if we apply cyber to this aspect of your business, will it break things? Will it stop your organization from operating? And how do we call that out early on, especially when we're liaising with government organizations as well? We don't just want to charge in and deploy everything that's best practice, because it won't necessarily work. And we know that manufacturing is a critical component of Australia's economy, and the government understands that as well. And that's where, again, that communication is so important. And providing that feedback is critical, right? I mean, every time the Australian government's come out with legislation that dictates the way that organisations operate within Australia, they've opened up the ability to provide feedback. They do actually provide windows of opportunity to say, that's great, sounds fantastic, but it will break everything that we have that's pre-1990, for instance. So perhaps I've gone on a bit of tangent answering that question, but I think it's important.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to hear from our two CEOs of two manufacturers. Is the government stance here increasing regulation of interest to you, or is it relevant? Grant, what would you say?
Look, it is definitely of interest to me. I mean, I have the benefit sometimes of attending a lot of international trade shows, particularly defence trade shows. Last year I was involved in 6 and got to travel with some fairly senior government members. One in particular, the Shadow Minister, James Patterson, I think. That's James, yeah. And had a lot of conversations with him about, our vulnerability as a country to particularly state-based actors. And, we also spent a lot of time with, companies like Electroboat and Huntington Inglis as part of this AUKUS, or bidding for work on the AUKUS submarine, Virginia class. And it's through all that you understand just how complex the subject is, and also what the potential is for damage to Australia. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interaction between government and manufacturing at the moment. Certainly, when I'm with them on international tours, that is heightened. But even when I get back, there's a lot of dialogue that takes place. That I'm comforted that that we have a lot of people looking after our interests that you don't even think about, right? So not that you'll ever be secure or 100% secure, but it's just very gratifying to know that there's a lot of grunt and horsepower that's employed at the moment from the government's perspective, safeguarding or aiming to safeguard not just manufacturing, but all of Australia in terms of potential threats and ongoing threats from other countries in particular.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I would agree with Grant. Does it change what we do? No, but it's really good to have a big brother up there who's outlining the key steps and what should be included and how it should be included. It's the requirement to report, the Privacy Commissioner, which makes us fully aware of our obligations to conform. But basically we do the right thing, and we do it with eyes wide open, and we take all information we can gather to make the right decision for the business and for the community we work and live in.
Peter, I'll just add one other thing of very real benefit, certainly to myself as a manufacturer and developing work internationally, particularly in the defence field, is the government the government has helped us considerably in identifying what are the roadblocks for our business in terms of securing an opportunity to do business with large US and other defence companies. And in very practical terms, they'll say, look, in order to do work for this company, the only people that can deal with this company have to have NV1, defence security and above. You'll have to have DISP membership, which we've got. There'll be nobody working on that project. If it's an ITAR programs, international terrorism and arms related program, that are, foreign nationals or not Australian citizens, and, anybody working on this project has to be vetted. So I've been very, very pleased with the proactivity that they have shown in providing a roadmap in order to do work for certain companies. And that has led us to securing two projects in the last 12 months. Although they're not huge at the moment, they will, or hopefully, will develop into, over the next couple of years, into quite large ongoing packets of work. And that has been a direct result of assistance from government providing a direction as to what we need to do, what steps we need to have in place. And then actually they provided the introduction as well. But because we had done our homework, because they had provided advice, we were able to quote and then secure that business. So yeah, look, they are doing some pretty good things in that space.
Thanks, Grant. Julie, one thing we haven't talked about so far is intellectual property security. Speaking of governments, you received a grant through the critical minerals pathway, and that's taken you into this new area of IP security. So can you tell us how you've tackled IP security in that area?
The old-fashioned way. Nobody has access. Similar to what Grant was talking about, a safe with a USB. We have a separate server not linked to the cloud, but is backed up off-site through the old-fashioned magnetic tapes and things like that. We don't trust any linked to the internet. All of the information is not connected in any way. Totally standalone service. So belt and braces, as well as locked rooms and safes, basically.
This is your Harrison Spark initiative, the 10 years forward R&D you're doing. That's totally isolated from the rest of the company.
And indeed the world.
Yes, and that's key with registering IP, isn't it? As soon as anything goes out, then it's a lost asset.
Michael, we've got into a bit of a discussion about the government there and regulation and so on. And Grant's described a situation where there's been an assistance through government intervention. Is government regulation ever an advantage?
I think it certainly is. I think, again, one of my core mindsets around the application of cyber is that it becomes a matter of competitive advantage for Australia, for sovereign capability. I think it's assisting through programs that are now freely available. There's one known as CI Up that the government hosts, that they're willing to engage with you and look at, do you indeed have critical assets that are under the Critical Infrastructure Act, under that umbrella? Are there activities that you can do with your staff in a proactive manner? They're coming out with some brilliant white papers, town halls that allow you to go in person and meet with representatives to demystify some of the questions or queries that you may have specific to your organization. So I think it's incredibly beneficial. I think more importantly, on a world stage, We know that different governments talk with one another to highlight the areas of concern based on what has been seen, what has been not necessarily publicly acknowledged, perhaps, but observed. I think it is important that government supports industry, and it's vice versa, right? It needs to be a bi-directional relationship where insights can be shared from the customer base, customer landscape back to government to kind of shift and change the policies that are created. I think government definitely wants to create kind of the benchmark, the standard. But again, it all comes through that open communication. And sovereign capability is important, and the ability to shift and pivot is fundamental. But communicating and have conversations like this, I think, is something that's so incredibly valuable, and it uplifts our nation, our capabilities holistically.
Pete, can I just interject for a second? I agree with one thing that Michael touched on was I guess a commercial advantage, and what we're finding, not just in the defence field, but having a certain level of cyber and being able to promote a certain level of security within our business and our ability to retain and hold and keep secure client data, that has had tangible commercial benefits for us, particularly with higher end clients in the medical field, say, for example, where IP is very, very important. But if we're dealing in the US and a US customer has an ability to source machining or molding or tooling anywhere in the world, because Australia and Australian companies are perceived as being more secure with their data, and we can actually add to that by providing them with more information on how we keep their data secure. That has led us to some commercial gains over, let's say, their traditional model, which was sourcing to Asia, say, for example, right, where a lot of companies have had bad experiences. I mean, this is not to knock all Asian vendors, but there are less standards applying to data security in a lot of countries, and we are starting to see a lot more wins in that field commercially.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you everyone on the panel today. With that, we're coming towards the close of our webinar today. But I'd like to turn now back to Rade Bogdanovic of Softlabs. Rade, you've been listening to the conversation, and what are your takeaways from today's discussion? What should we learn from today's discussion?
Well, thanks everyone first for the contribution. It was really incredibly good discussion, I would think. I was writing non-stop, so I have quite a few notes here, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I think we saw two examples, both from Julie and Grant's, where they take, as you said previously, Peter, they take a different approach. One being outsourcing, the other one being taken from more internal side of perspective. But both stories will have the same or similar sort of a punchline in that space. And what I've also heard is that from Michael, for instance, you don't know what you don't know, which is quite right, and it's a dangerous thing for all of us, challenging thing if nothing else. From Julie, it's not when, it's when, it's not if. So I think that's also one of the lines that we also as always need to keep in mind. And then Grant mentioned that, and it's completely true. You cannot be 100% secure. So it's a process. It's an ongoing process. The threats are coming externally, coming internally. We've heard all sorts of different variations on that one, and there are many, many more. Joel experienced, interesting, had some interesting experiences in that space, and really, I can only imagine, the weight it had on your organization, Julie. And again, with Grant's, working with defense, I'm sure there are so many interesting points and challenges that you need to overcome in providing that safe ambient for your work. So I would say, very good discussion from Softlabs side. We're always trying to, similar to what Michael said, listen to the customer, understand the strategy, where they want to go. and then try to help if we can by partnering with with Michael and his team, across the nation, across the region, and fulfill some of these requirements, and help provide safer and better environments and business for all of us.
Thank you, Rade. Well, we've heard a lot today. We heard from a leader of a software and hardware business that deals with cybersecurity threats every day. We heard from a company that's experienced a cyber intrusion and survived. We heard from another company that's entering the defense field with all its new disciplines. All provided interesting perspectives, and thank you very much to our panel, Michael Murphy, Grant Tinney, and Julie Harrison, and of course, Rade Bogdanovic. Thanks to Softlabs Enterprise Software, who made this webinar possible. Do reach out to them to discuss your needs and how they can help. It's goodbye for me, Peter Roberts. To those watching at the office, many thanks for joining us. With that, I'll close today's meeting. Thank you very much and goodbye.